Good afternoon and welcome to my channel, The Fruitcake Astrologer, where I will give you an astrologer's take on current events and people in the news. If you enjoy these readings, I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe. So as I'm recording this, the world has gone crazy. The stock market has gone up and down, but mostly down, freaking a lot of people out. There have been travel bans. Trump, I believe, yesterday or the day before announced no flights in from Europe. This afternoon, today is March 13th, he's about to announce a state of emergency for the United States. So things are looking pretty Looney Tunes. Oh dear. So I want to go ahead and take a look at this summer. Now, I did a chart for March, April, and May, and it did look like the stock market would go down in March. So I did a prediction for February and March and said the stock market would come down, and it did. But it looks like it's going to come back toward the end of the month because the late March, April and May chart looks very fortunate. Does that mean that we're going to fare much better than the rest of the world for the coronavirus? I believe it does. But as I record this, things are pretty wild and crazy. So what I want to do is I want to look even farther ahead. I want to look at late June, July, and August, basically the summer chart. Now here it is. It's called the Cancer Ingress. It's when the sun moves in to the cardinal sign of Cancer, what you would call the summer equinox. Excuse me, the summer solstice. And it will predict for the United States the 3-month period. Now, when we do the first one, the Aries Ingress, that's the start of the zodiac, and he kind of takes precedence. That chart takes precedence for the year. So it's really like, oh my goodness, I'm predicting a fortunate year for the United States, but there will be period charts that look tough, okay, within that year. Does it mean we'll fare better than the other countries? You know, as an American, I certainly hope we will fare better. As I record this, I'm not a doctor or anything, but I have not been impressed with the CDC, nor the World Health Organization, nor China. And just so you guys know, in a previous reading, I said there were going to be lots of bungling going on, and this will continue. You know, and in their defense, this has never happened before. And I'm left thinking how fortunate we are that the first global pandemic is so benign. Okay, I'm not making light of, people passing. I am in my 60s, and that's one of the risk categories. So, but I am, absolutely thrilled it's not going after my grandkids, or my children or my grandchildren. So if it had to be a pandemic, I think we got off easy. Okay, I do think it will mutate, but right now we're getting off kind of easy. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's take a look. For you astrologers, I showed the chart. Now I'm going to go to bullet point for you non-astrologers. I might go back and forth to the chart, but for you non-astrologers, here goes. So this is a branch of astrology called mundane astrology, and this chart rules the United States, and instead of the first house ruling a person, it rules the people. Okay. So, as I said, tough times as I record this, but I think this could lead to a big boom in the United States because of all the stuff made outside of the U.S. will now need to be made here. Consider that China and India have both said they won't be sending drugs to us, or at least hinted as much, that they felt like they would need to save them for their own population. China's just now starting back up, but of course, I'm sure as I write this, or as I record this, China is like blaming the United States for the coronavirus, and oh my goodness, and we've had this trade war going on. I'm not seeing that getting better. Okay, so I'm thinking that those jobs that got shipped overseas are going to get sent back to the United States, leading to a blue-collar boom. At least I'm thinking that's what it means. Now, the ascendant is conjunct the fixed star called Agena, which is the pain of learning. So we are facing our first worldwide pandemic. And there is much to be learned. And yes, it looks like it's going to be quite painful. As I mentioned, I'm just really, grateful that the first pandemic wasn't as virulent as it could have been, like in MERS, 30%, Ebola, greater than 50%. I mean, we could be really in bad shape. So I think what we're learning is lessons about living in a populated, interconnected world. Okay, these are the lessons that we are to look at. Now, I think people on the verge of retirement are going to be rethinking that, of course. People are going to look to be angry and emotional. Now, I'm talking about this in June, not now. I'm talking about in June, July, and August. People are going to be angry and emotional at the mishandling of the virus crisis. I believe death will become part of our life in a way we haven't seen in quite a while. I'm in my 60s. My parents' generation saw the Depression. I mean, one generation saw the Depression, World War I, World War II, and the Korean War. My generation, things I remember as big, what they call black swan events. We saw Vietnam. We saw the worst economy I've ever seen was in the 70s. I mean, I remember the credit crisis in 2008 was a cakewalk compared to what happened in the 70s with the oil embargo. And then I think of my kids who are in their late 30s, and my kids have really never seen anything. They've basically had it pretty good. So I think this will be the first crisis for what we call the millennial generation. It looks like if I look at the second house, which is money, that Jupiter rules it. Now, Jupiter is called the greater beneficent, and Jupiter rules Sagittarius. But it's conjunct Saturn. Pluto conjunct Jupiter, conjunct Saturn. So, restriction of great wealth. If you consider Jupiter conjunct Pluto, in my experience, has been one of the biggest indicators of massive wealth in astrology. But they are retrograde, all three of them. So there have been reversals of great wealth. But Saturn, you see Saturn's passing away. He's moving into Aquarius. That means he's moving away, and I checked the ephemeris, he will not retrograde back to meet them. So I think the financial stuff is going to pass away in June, July, and August. Okay? The Saturn stuff who restricts and worries. Okay, now the third house rules communications, auto, short distance travel. So look at the president, and Virgo is ruled by Mercury, and he is retrograde in the 8th house in Cancer. Okay? Now, I would expect the president to do a lot of talking during this period. Look at this chart. Look how Mercury is almost unaffected. I mean, you can monkey with the orbs on the aspects, but what this means is he's going to talk a lot, and I would expect this not to help him. Okay? Now, I would expect the president to use more canned speeches. If you've ever listened to the president speak, he tends to speak from the cuff. He's kind of an entertainer and speaks from the cuff. But I think he's going to be much more guarded. Mercury retrograde is reversals. It's reworking. I think he's going to be much more careful about what he says during this period. Understand the guy's facing re-election in 6 months, and everything he says potentially could be used against him. So I think he's going to talk a lot, but I think he's going to be a lot more scripted than he's been in the past. I think the president is going to be affected by this coronavirus. I think he's going to have a family member affected by this, maybe pass during this period. He looks pretty emotional. Mercury in Cancer, the sign ruled by the moon, and facing his own setbacks. So I would say a very rough period to be president of the United States for the president. Okay? Now, I was looking at this and I was thinking, could there be an internet outage? And why do I say that? Because the sun, which takes on special importance in this chart, is in the 8th house, and it's intercepted in the 9th house of publishing, which is the internet, essentially. The moon is in Gemini. And Gemini is ruled by Mercury, which is retrograde. So we're seeing interceptions and retrogrades. And I wonder if there will be internet outages that maybe they're going to say, we don't want stuff televised, potentially images of people passing away. So I could definitely make a case for that. Okay. 4th house, the homeland, real estate. Expect a hot, wet summer. I believe you will have a hot, Mars is in the 4th house, conjunct Neptune, planet of water, hot, wet. I think it could also mean that the National Guard will be called out in the homeland. Mars rules the military. I don't think it will get violent because it's conjunct Neptune, and Neptune is not a violent sign. Now, interest rates. For those of you who are interested in purchasing a home, now typically interest rates rise during the fire signs, but retract in, say, Pisces. So I'm having a tough time calling that because Mars is a fire, the fire planet, conjunct to Neptune. So I don't know if that means they will come up and down. That one's a tough one for me to call. Okay, moving on to the 5th house. Now, the 5th house rules the stock market. And as I look at this chart, I'm like, oh my gosh, the stock market is like tanking, and it's just having these wild fluctuating days, up 1,000, down 2,000. It's been wild and crazy. But you will notice Mars is in a grand trine here with the 8th house in the money houses, in the money sign of Scorpio. Wow. With Scorpio involved. Scorpio in the 1st and the 8th house. So I'm sitting here going, gosh, it sure looks like stocks are going to take off, sure looks that way. Now, I would expect Neptunian stocks to surge, medical stocks might just go bazonko, while Venus in Gemini stocks to falter. Venus in Gemini, what's that mean? That means Venus is luxuries, and it's in an air sign of Gemini, ruled by that Mercury retrograde. So I'm thinking airlines are going to take a hit, luxuries are going to take a hit. So, you may need to adjust your portfolio some, but that there will be stocks that will really take off. Now, the 6th house, which in a mundane chart can be exceedingly important because it rules the common man. And since we're looking in the midst of a coronavirus crisis, it's a 6th house of health. So to me, it's a big sign. It's a big house right now. Now, it is ruled by Mars, which is in that big grand trine. Look, it's in a big grand trine with Mercury, which rules the president, the leadership. Okay, so I think things are going to do better than we would think at this moment. At this moment, with the stock market crashing and state of emergency being declared, it looks like, it's hard to fathom. But it looks like jobs are going to be doing better. Okay, and it looks like Trump will intercede suddenly or shockingly, Uranus in the 6th, to intercede to help displaced workers. Now, like I said in the beginning, we used to get things outside the United States. For instance, our drugs. In fact, I believe no chemotherapy drugs are made in the United States at all. So when they run out, they run out. And I think this is going to cause a boom in blue-collar construction jobs. That's what I think. Because they're going to have to start getting those factories built, okay, so that we can start making our own medication. The most common drugs come from India. And they're saying, India at the time of this is saying we're not going to be exporting drugs because, we want to keep them for our own. Well, where are we going to get them? What happens if your child needs antibiotics and we can't get them? I think the top 26 drugs, most common drugs, come from India. we are going to have to do something about it. And we as the United States are perfectly capable of ramping things up if necessary. So I think that we could see a boom. And the third reason I think that is because I've been looking at Trump's chart with the election looming. I'm going to do his natal chart. And he has the classic architect's aspect. I think he wants to rebuild this country. Okay, I think he's kind of itching to rebuild our infrastructure. And I'm wondering if he will take advantage of this crisis to start getting the United States. Some of our airports are really dated and, and such, and our bridges and such. Maybe use this to put these displaced workers back to work. One thing I'm looking forward to, actually, is that this crisis might also mean that our healthcare gets a much-needed revamp. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but the cost of medical insurance is like a second house payment. And then when you go to use it, you find out your deductible is so high and they don't cover stuff. I mean, it's like, what are you paying all this money for every month because you don't get anything out of it? So I think that this crisis will bring much-needed attention to the problems in the United States healthcare system and hopefully bring about much-needed change. But it looks during this summer period, there's going to be probably temporary military hospitals set up. I believe that a lot of energy is going to go toward trying to help the people who will get ill. From what I understand from Dr. John Campbell on YouTube, 88% of people are going to get a very, mild case. 15% will need some intervention, maybe respirators or antibiotics or something for secondary infections. And 5% will become critically ill. Now, I'm not a doctor, as I said, but he said the critically ill folks are going to be the ones where the case fatality rate, we can affect that. With good health care, the bulk of those folks should survive. So we'll get to see how well that's handled. I hope it's handled well. So to make a long story short, I think jobs are going to come back. It sure looks like it. I believe there will be a stimulus program, Uranus in Taurus, trining the midheaven. The government's going to come out with that. Okay, moving on to the 7th house, and this is where things look to be, yikes, not so good. The fixed star, Algol, rules the 7th house. Algol is, the reason, Algol is called losing your head. Now that can mean figuratively, I get symbols, I don't get specifics, right? But that means, it could mean public beheadings. It could be as literal as public beheadings by our open enemies. The 7th house rules open enemies. Is Iran going to execute people because, somebody's head has to roll because of the mismanagement in Iran of the coronavirus? Who knows? India and China are refusing to send meds to the United States. And of course, the 7th house rules treaties, negotiations, legal issues. So I'm wondering if this is going to mean that negotiations with allies, with other countries, is going to fall apart in a big way. Now, you look at this. This is Venus is retrograde. That is quite rare. I think Venus only retrogrades maybe 2% or maybe 4% of the time. It is very rare for Venus to retrograde. So there she is, retrograde in the 7th house. Yikes! Ruling the 7th house of Taurus, ruled by with Algol conjunct the 7th house. So it literally says diplomacy between these countries is going to be, at best, difficult. Does it look like war? So what happens when negotiations fall apart? War. What happens when treaties fall apart, are broken? War. But I don't think there will be war because Mars, ruler of war, is conjunct Neptune, and Neptune's far too gentle. Pisces is far too gentle to go to war. It's very weakened. And also the second sign that Mars is weakened in is Gemini, and Venus is in Gemini. So I think there'll be lots of talk, Gemini rules communication and talk, but I don't think it will come to all-out war, at least in June, July, and August. I haven't looked forward, but it looks like we might see diplomats expelled, retrograde, reversals, kicked out. It looks like a tough quarter for lawsuits. Is everyone dying of the coronavirus going to clog up the legal system, suing, like the nursing home where their mother died of the coronavirus? Is it going to be like people are just going to lose their heads? So I think it's going to be tough in that area. Okay, let's move on to the 8th house, which rules wealth, debt, taxes. So I think, look at all those inconjuncts. That's called the finger of God. You see that those two inconjuncts fanning off from that stellium in the 8th to the part of misfortune and the ascendant, and Jupiter and Pluto conjunct Saturn. So inconjuncts mean reorganization and rejection and disconnection. So I think great fortunes have been lost, but I think it's saying great fortunes will need to reorganize their portfolios. Okay? In my opinion, what's going to happen is blue collar manufacturing will boom. Are you going to portion? There will be great wealth to be made in rebuilding. Factories, companies coming back, manufacturing goods that are in short supply. There'll be a huge demand for it. So I think the president will push to lead manufacturing jobs out of China, out of foreign countries, and back into the United States. And as I mentioned earlier, it looks like we're going to have a lot of death, a grand trine, easy flow, I'm sorry to say. Grand trine between the 8th house of death, the 12th and the 1st, which in Scorpio, the sign of death to the 4th yard graveyard. Ugh, bummer. So I think we can also expect auxiliary deaths. What do I mean to that? Like, say there is a huge outbreak of the coronavirus and the hospitals are swamped. Not a good time to have a heart attack. You can't even get in front of a doctor. There won't be an ambulance around to come get you. So I think there will be an increase in auxiliary deaths and lawsuits. People are going to want to sue because they couldn't get their loved one into the hospital. I think it's going to be yuck. So take a minute. If you need life-saving medication, maybe you're on heart medication, I don't know, or diabetes, you need insulin, get it now, because if you have a crisis, if the outbreak hits your community hard, are you even going to be able to get through to a doctor to get a prescription for anything? So take a minute, look around you, and I would suggest getting a little extra. And I've said that in my last couple of videos. And that's even more so now that China and India are starting to say, we're going to cut your medicines off. Okay? So take a minute. Okay. Now, I also would not be at all surprised if the president cuts foreign aid. Okay? He may be saying that we are in emergency and we can't afford to be helping other nations. And if you've ever heard him talk, he's like, America first, Americans first. So I wouldn't at all be surprised if the president cuts foreign aid right now and said, we need those emergency funds to help our people. Now, that may be for good or ill. We may make enemies. 7th house, public enemies, looking pretty yuck. So, I don't know. He could take a lot of heat for doing that. He could take a lot of praise for doing that. And who knows, okay? I am not a financial advisor or anything, but what the chart seems to be telling me is that reorganization, you see that finger of God, the two inconjuncts coming off that, is required to maintain great wealth, Pluto conjunct Jupiter. Okay, so something to ponder with your financial advisor. Of course, you know, the old economics saying, buy low, sell high. So you want to buy when things look terrible. You know, when everybody's dumped the airline stocks and there were pennies on the dollar, that's when you snap them up. And I'm just going to tell you a personal story about when I was young. I remember oil crashed, and I could have bought Exxon stock for $17 a share back when it looked horrible. I mean, I don't even know if I'd bought like $1,000 what that would be worth today. But I look back on that and wish I'd had some money. I didn't have any money, you know, but so keep your eyes open for good investment opportunities. Okay, as I write this, oil prices are very, very low. Like the lowest in like almost 20 years. Holy smokes. So Neptune rules oil, and so does Pluto. So I think they're going to come back. I think they might end up being good investments. You know, buy low, sell high. Okay, ninth house, more intercepted. Borders are going to continue to stay closed. And I would expect potentially higher education is the ninth house, colleges to close. And even more local quarantining because the third house rules short distance travel and it's also intercepted, which I'm a little bit surprised about, but, you know, because it doesn't affect children, but you're right, you know, people say, well, they'll bring it home to their grandparents. So I think that's a local decision. I think that would be a hardship on parents who work. You know, who's going to take care of their kids? What are they going to do during the day? I worry about that sometimes. But anyway, okay, 10th house, the president. Ouch time. Really tough time for the president. I think he's going to face reversals. I think his poll numbers are going to go down. I think he's going to talk a lot, probably to his detriment. I think he will use more canned speeches. I think he will potentially face a death in his family, someone he cares about, Moon. But that said, his base and the people look supportive of him. Look how Mercury is in a grand trine with the first house. Okay, so his base looks unmovable. Scorpio is a fixed sign, the most unmovable of all the zodiac signs, and I think this means his base will stay with him through misfortune and death, and he's got tough financial decisions ahead. Okay, like I said, I thought he might, you know, cut foreign aid. I think he might really clamp down on foreign aid to people who are not U.S. citizens. 11th house affairs. You'll notice the 11th and 12th houses are both ruled by that Venus that is in such tough shape. So yuck. So healthcare workers are in for a rough quarter. Okay, we could just intuit that. Healthcare workers would be the 6th from the 6th. The vice president is ruled by the 11th house, and he looks to have a really tough quarter. And you will note that Pence has been put in charge of this coronavirus. And there have been rumors circulating that Trump might choose another running mate. And with Venus retrograde ruling the 11th house of the vice president, that might just be true. Now, the 11th house also rules legislation, the Congress, large corporations. These all look to have setbacks. And I'm wondering if there will be even some war of words going on in the Congress. Regarding 12th house affairs, which is generally considered to be the worst house in the zodiac, things look to be really difficult for them as well, because you'll notice it has a part of misfortune in it. Its ruler is Venus, which is retrograde. Now, the 12th house rules confined places, all like mental institutions, jails, nursing homes, hospitals, okay, and also retirees. So we can tell, you know, from the ruler Venus being retrograde, that things aren't going to go well in those areas. Now, the 12th house also rules law enforcement, so I would expect law enforcement to also be in for a rough quarter. Okay, So, as I record this, the president is about to come out. It's about 3:30 on the 13th, and the president is about to come out and declare a national emergency. But I want to say that good things can come from this coronavirus. For instance, the U.S. medical system is in terrible need of revamping. Will this be the crisis that's needed to bring about that necessary change? Now, as I record this, schools are closing. And I'm wondering if all these homebound children might revolutionize our school system, which many of you would agree are not doing very well. They're, our quote-unquote failing school system. Imagine if they record the best teachers in the world to record the math lesson or the history lesson or the science lesson. How much better would our students be to have the best teachers in the world teaching them? So I'm just saying maybe schools will be revolutionized and go more remote, more pre-recorded lessons. This could really revolutionize the schools. Let's see. More and more jobs could go remote out of this. That would improve the quality of life for a lot of people facing long commutes in, say, LA. It would lessen air pollution. It would lower our dependence on fossil fuels. It would save so much money on wear and tear on our cars and our highways and people's pocketbooks, buying gas. Another thing is I think maybe it will revolutionize travel. I think the world will come to realize how vulnerable we are to a truly horrific pandemic, one with a massive death rate like MERS or SARS or, Ebola. So I think they might implement new laws that said you can't travel sick. Just like you go through TSA screening, you will go through a medical screening and they will stop allowing sick people to travel. And, think about how that will affect our medical system, because every time I fly, I come home with something, that will reduce the medical care in our country because we're not running around in airports getting infected. And the final thing is, I think that we are realizing how dependent we have become in the United States for things manufactured outside the United States. For instance, I've mentioned China and India about the drug situation. Wow, how vulnerable are we? What if our kid needs some antibiotics? So I think those jobs are going to start roaring back into the United States. And I think from this crisis could come a big blue-collar boom. I also think that because the president wants to stimulate the economy, there will be the beginning of construction and rebuilding of the United States. So, how tragic that people of my generation are going to be hard hit by this. How tragic that the economy has been hit. But I think if we're smart, if we're resourceful, we can turn this into something really positive for the United States and really learn from the mistakes that are going to be made. Okay, if you enjoyed this, I hope you'll like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for listening.